Well, good morning again, everybody. Glad you are here with us. I see a few people jumping into the live chat or the live stream. I see nobody jumping into chat except Greg and I, actually. So, as I just said in the live chat, maybe it's just Greg and I this morning. I don't know. If so, Greg, this will be a great conversation, just the two of us. And Greg and I always find plenty of things to talk about, just the two of us, so that will be fine. Could just be Greg and I. And hopefully it won't just be the two of us. I see the number on the chat going up just a little bit. So if you are here and you want to say hello to everybody, that will be wonderful. Just to let everybody know that you're here. And hopefully there'll be some comments and questions coming in just a few moments as we talk about the sermon and talk about any other topics that you want to bring up. My wife is saying I'm so quiet. Is that on my end or yours? Can anybody else comment? Is the stream too quiet, or can you hear me? I could hear myself on my iPad. That's why you saw me turning it down. Maybe somebody could comment there really quickly and let us know if you can hear me or not. I'm going to keep talking like you can hear me. And okay, Mark and Sharon are here, but Mark and Sharon, can you hear me? That's the question. The question we're trying to answer is the audio loud enough? Hi, Tom. Eric and Erica are here. Erica, I hope you're doing well and recovering from your surgery. We prayed for you on Wednesday night during Bible study. All right, I'm going to keep going. Lindsay, I guess maybe it's just you and the TV at home that you can't hear me, so hopefully you can turn that up a little bit. Oh, the volume is low. So can you turn the volume up there? It's on the actual audio box to the left, to your right, I mean. Yep. And you got to turn up my microphone. Hopefully that will improve the sound. Greg says he can hear me. All right, well, we're working on some technical difficulties here with the sound, and hopefully it'll be better. Were you able to turn it up a little bit? Okay, great. All right, we're turned up now, and we get going. Yes, it was you and the Salgados that could not hear it. Erica is doing a lot better. Yes, we are glad to be able to pray for you. Glad to hear that you're doing better, Erica, and we hope that your recovery still goes well here. Okay, I am quiet, but did it get better? Did the volume go up a little bit for everybody? Can you comment on that? Hopefully it went up at least a little bit. Amanda turned it up here for me. Okay, I have one question already. Good morning, Jim. I see your comment. We have one question come in already, and so let me read the question for everybody, and then I'll make some comments about it. Question from the sermon. Noah, can you double check the sound? Everybody's saying it's a little too quiet. Okay. Noah is changing the volume, so hopefully it's even better now. And so we're doing a little learning here this morning, trying to train some other people on this. Okay, trying to train my daughter on this. Here's the question. Question is, practically speaking, how do you put MacArthur's quote into our daily habits and lives? Everything we read or watch, even including the Bible, shows sins of the flesh. Even G-rated movies deal with good versus evil, relationships, etc. Okay, so how do we then deal with that? This is a good question. And the reason why this is a really good question, I think, is because it deals with something that it actually deals with a topic we talked about on Wednesday night, which is our understanding of sanctification. Sanctification meaning to be made into the image of Christ, to be made holy, and to be made more, to be made righteous inwardly as we ultimately then will be made righteous fully when we go to heaven. So, how do we then practically live in the world but not of the world? And if we are practically living in the world, then we must and we should rightfully understand that we are going to encounter sinfulness and evil and unrighteousness all around us. We can't throw a rock in our world without seeing and experiencing sinfulness. And we don't even need to throw a rock because we even have sinfulness within us. So how do we practically put MacArthur's quote into practice? MacArthur's quote again is, "We should not be entertained by the sins for which Christ died." Well, the key to that, and recognize that statement by John MacArthur is simply just a statement by John MacArthur. It is not the Bible, okay? But it does speak to a good point, which is that we should not be entertained by sin. Now, being entertained by sin and watching something for entertainment that contains sin, I think we can draw a line between. And what I mean is that it's one thing to say the movie that I'm watching represents good versus evil, and I am entertained and enjoying the participation in this movie and in this story that contains evil and contains a depiction of evil, versus being entertained by and enjoying the evil itself. This week my kids are taking finals, and in their classes, for whatever reason, at a Reformed Christian school, Lord of the Rings is a big deal at their school. One of the classic works from Tolkien, which depicts the epic story of good versus evil. Tolkien uses so many different characters to represent Aragorn, the king, and the return of the king being the last portion of that, representing Aragorn being a representation of Christ and him leading the armies of people against evil. But then you have Sauron and Saruman and the orcs and the ring and all those things representing evil. And so the story is good versus evil. And how can we be entertained and enjoy the story of Lord of the Rings either in a novel or in can we enjoy them in a novel, or can we enjoy them in a movie, in a film? Well, the answer, I don't think we can come to any other conclusion on that question other than to say yes, we can enjoy those things, those films, those books, those novels. But the difference is if we are enjoying them because of the evil and celebrating the evil that's there. This is where certain TV shows, I'm going to try not to be too particular here, simply for the sake of sounding somewhat legalistic on things, but this is where certain TV shows, certain movies, certain books, certain films, certain productions, certain entertainment as a whole actually doesn't just speak to the story of good versus evil, but it actually celebrates the evil itself. It celebrates the sinfulness itself. There is where we ought to be quite careful. And I think we could probably say there's a place where we could still consume those things very, very carefully or cautiously, where we aren't celebrating the evil or the inherent sinfulness of it. Although that to me seems like quite a long shot, maybe in a very practical sense. but where I think the line can be drawn there is not seeing evil or the presence of evil or sinfulness, but an actual celebration or acceptance of it versus a denial or conquering of it. We might see a story that speaks to evil, or maybe you have a story about an abusive father and who maybe is an alcoholic. I'm literally making things up right now. Who maybe is an alcoholic. And so you see the fallenness and brokenness of this man's life. Well, a story that sort of celebrates that, which I would seem hard to believe, I don't know why anybody watched that, but a story that would celebrate that would not be something that would be particularly helpful for us to watch, but a story that shows redemption in all of that and shows the overcoming of those things, maybe even not from a Christian perspective, at least we see good overcoming evil, and the sinfulness, the inherent evilness of it, is not celebrated but denied. That's where I think we can draw the line on that, and see that there's a place for entertainment in film and in novels and TV shows or whatever it is. We can see that sort of, that line maybe. And I get that that's a fine line. It's a hard line to discern. But I think that's the best way I can answer it. So here so this is the follow-up question as I'm answering, and I'm getting this follow-up question. Is there a litmus test or a set of questions that we can ask ourselves as we watch and read entertainment? Well, I mean, I think the first litmus test you'd want to ask is, where's my own heart on this? That's a good place to start, although we would have to, in the same moment, recognize that our own hearts can deceive us even in these things. Oh boy, I have two kids here in the room with me today and one microphone, and I see the microphone being turned around on the other side of the camera, which means an answer is coming at me from the other side of the camera. So give me just a second. Let me. No, you can still answer. I'm not saying you can't answer. Just give me a second to finish my thought here. So first, we would want to look at ourselves and say, where is our heart on this? Secondly, I think we would want to ask, is the inherent sinfulness of what we are going to consume celebrated, or do we see the overcoming of it? And look, I'm not saying that's the only litmus test, but what I'm saying is that there is an obvious sense in some places where sin is being laughed at, applauded, and celebrated in our culture and in what we're watching. And that's where I think the line should be very, very, it would be important to draw and to look at. Okay, Noah, you want to answer on this?
Sorry, I had to turn back on the microphone because...
You guys are talking, I know.
Well, yeah.
I know. That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I was more just going to summarize what you just said and do some alliteration there.
Oh, great. After I've already talked about alliteration this morning not being good, now you're going to alliterate the whole thing.
Yeah,
All right, great, go for it.
It also speaks to Kurt's question as well.
Because Kurt's question he's asking is, do we draw lines for each other or ourselves? And that's a good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the first, and you said this, the first matter is conscience for every individual person. And so... And that is hard to tell sometimes whether or not something is a matter of conscience or something is actually objectionable, because that's a different place for every person.
Each person. Yeah, okay, let me say something about that. Christian conscience is a very, very important thing to understand and to recognize. Christian conscience is, I'm feeling like this might be a sinful act that I'm engaging in. I need to stop. Now, what you're saying, Noah, is important. That can be different for different people. What you might be convicted of might not be something somebody else is convicted of, which is why it's important to recognize that our conscience is not our only guide here. Okay, go on.
Yeah. I mean, that's Romans 14. They're all issues of conscience. There's no inherent sin involved, but we need to be wary of one another with that as well.
Correct.
And then the second point, which you also said, was whether or not is how it depicts sin, because every good story has sin in it, or else it's not a good story.
Okay, let's be. Sorry, that's funny. Every good story has sin in it. Every good story has sin in it because the story of mankind has sin in it, and it's God's overcoming of sin and punishing Christ to redeem us. And so, in some sense, every good story reflects that in some way. All right, go on.
Yeah, there's no. I mean, every good story has a. Someone sneezed. Every good story has a protagonist or an antagonist in some sense. Those might not be people, but
right.
So sin has to be present. Now, it's whether or not sin is glorified that makes the issue. Because
celebrated, glorified, whatever word we want to put on there.
Yeah, because there's a way in which sin doesn't necessarily, have to be, outright said this is wrong and this is why. But sometimes the way that's done is actually like mocking either the person who's committing the act or the act itself, and saying like this is ridiculous enough that
sure
it doesn't have a place in
sure.
in moral human life,
right?
Or it's done by this is heinous, this is wrong, and depicting it that way,
right?
And so those two things really that probably eliminates most entertainment.
Correct.
But it also...
All right, what's your alliteration here? You said you had alliteration for us.
I was going to say conscience and glorification.
Okay. But that's not alliterated. That's C and G.
Well, yeah, but that's just two words.
Conscience and celebrated.
It's 2 points. Yeah, there you go, 2 C's.
That's 2 C's. Okay. Is that it? Just a 2 point?
Yeah, I think... there's probably... There's definitely more.
Well, this would not fly in a Baptist church because there's only 2 points in the sermon, and so there's got to be 3.
I could come up with a third if you'd
like.
Well,
if you want to think about it, that's great. Kurt says maybe God thought that same thing when he wrote his story. I think what Kurt's referring to there, he leaves this kind of cryptic, but I think what he's saying is that all good stories have sin. I'm not sure we want to look at it exactly that way.
Well,
but
Romans 9 would kind of indicate that.
Okay, let me finish my answer here, okay? Turn Noah's microphone off back there, Amanda, okay? Okay. Noah said Romans 9 does sort of depict it, and that's right. Remember, Romans 9 says, what if God, wanting to show his glory, reveals it through wrath by punishing those whom he's prepared as vessels of wrath? And so, yes, in some sense, Kurt, you are absolutely right. The story of mankind, and look, this phrase, the story of humanity, the story of creation, all this, that is a really, really popular phrase these days. Everybody wants to talk in story. But in this case, we should talk the storyline of mankind, the timeline of history of mankind was made, and time was made so that man would fall into sin and God could reveal himself through redemption. Both through redemption, but also through the punishing of that sin. That is part of why we are here, because all of that reveals the glory of God. And so, yes, God's glory revealed through sin, God's glory revealed through the punishment of sin, and God's glory revealed through the redemption of sinners unto glory with him, okay? So, yeah, I do think in some sense we see the necessity of sin as part of any good story in a consumeristic entertainment sense, but we see the necessity of sin as part of the overall story of redemption in God's timeline and in God's economy of creation. Okay, good question. Hopefully that answers. Wow. Okay, so now Noah's getting well said Noah comments on the. This is unbelievable. No, it's very helpful to have Noah here. And Amanda is here learning to run the computer for us so that she can help out with that too. So we're all in here together, and very thankful to have Noah here in the room. It's fun to have, I'll say this since nobody's asking any questions anyway, it's fun to have not just my son here, but also a Bible college student and a seminarian here too, because deep issues of theology and hopefully outward workings of theology are all things that he's learning about and interacting with throughout his studies, and then in the church and at the school that Noah goes to. A big part of their learning process is... Thanks, Mom. Yeah. A big part of their learning process at Boyce College and Southern Seminary is practical interaction in the church. And what's interesting, I think a lot of seminaries and places would say that, like, oh yeah, you have to get practical experience in the church. And at Noah School, they say, no. You don't get practical experience in the church in order to do this better. What you are learning is practical experience in the church. And so church issues and things like that, and the theology that goes along with all of this, and how to, worship, and all the different things that we do in the church, he's learning about. And so it's fun to have these interactions. We mentioned this on Wednesday night during our study on Wednesday. Noah and I were having an interaction live Wednesday, and somebody said, "Oh, a big York House debate," and I made the comment that if you thought what we were doing on camera was debate, you really hadn't had a chance to really experience what we do. Which is funny, because for an hour after study, we had a big debate about what we talked about, and the finer points of theology and things like that. So it's good to have Noah here and to talk theology and to work through some of these practical things. All right, so I don't see any other questions coming in, which means you guys are either one, all talked out, or the weather has made you all sleepy and the sermon was too long and so everybody's tired. I'm not sure. No questions coming in. So if you have something you want to ask about, please feel free to ask. And if I didn't answer fully or give you a satisfactory answer about how to apply that quote that I gave from MacArthur, follow up with that. That's perfectly fine too. While I'm waiting for those to come in, there is one topic that I do want to mention this morning, and we're working on some help for everybody in this area, and you'll understand what I mean by that in a second. But I want you to know, as your pastor and as one who's trying to keep his finger on all the things going on right now, I recognize that most of us, and I'm going to say us because I'm going to put myself in this category, I recognize that most of us are growing restless with the quarantine and with the governmental restrictions that are upon us. I'm sure that's true for you personally in your daily lives, and I know many of you have expressed that in an ecclesiological sense, meaning gathering together here and what that looks like. So, look, restlessness is part of human nature, and it is not necessarily a good part of human nature. There is a reason why God demonstrated for us 6 days of rest, or 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. Here's one of the things that Noah's learning is that you can't laugh at people when they slip up. It's like we slip up when we say things, and I'm on camera here, okay, and I'm trying to get all the words right. And God designed us for 6 days of work and a day of rest. And the reason he did that is because we are restless in our natures. In our sinfulness, we have restlessness and we have rebelliousness as part of who we are. And part of being in Christ is putting that to death. And so I just want you all to know, I just want to give you this admonition. If you are growing restless in this, one, you are not alone. Misery loves company, and so you should recognize most of your brothers and sisters are dealing with this. But at the same time, I want you to know that restlessness, you need to combat it for a period of time. And the reason why I say that is because we are doing everything we can on this end to make it such that we can gather together when that's possible. I don't want to be away for any more weeks than are necessary. But right now, I and the other elders, we feel it's necessary. And we are continuing to monitor these things and to follow the governmental guidelines. We're continuing to listen to the counsel of Dr. Bob Chase, a member of our congregation here. And when all of those things line up such that we believe it is safe and prudent for us to gather together, we will do that. Okay? So be patient, find peace and rest during this time, and don't let that restlessness turn into inward or outward sin. Let me just say it that way. That's the best way I can say it. Don't let the restlessness and the rebelliousness inside you take hold and turn into outward sin, okay? Put it to death as best you can. All right, that's all I'll say about that. I have another follow-up coming in here. The balance of good works in the church and how people get out of balance. So that's a decent question, although I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to be answering on that. Can you clarify that one? So if you ask that question for me via text, the person texting me does not want to be named. And so if you could just clarify that question, and then I will deal with it whenever you clarify. Jim says, Philippians 3:19 says that those whose end is destruction glory in their shame, or as Jason said, they celebrate their sin. Yeah, good point. And he's talking about Philippians 3:19, Kurt, not Phil. Phil Forrest is usually here. He does usually have some good things to say. I do see Phil Forrest. He said good morning to everyone. But Phil does usually have good things to say, especially if you love fishing like Noah and I do. Phil has a lot of good things to say. But Jim is talking about the book of Philippians, not Phil Forrest. And Philippians 3:19 says that those whose end is destruction glory in their shame. And I said they celebrate their sins. Romans 1 says they worship the creation rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And Romans 1 also says that they not only practice these things, that is the sinfulness and debauchery that is present in our world, they not only practice these things, but they give approval for those who do. And so we should recognize that sinfulness that is present in our world is something that should be put to death in us, in ourselves, as part of our salvation, and that is part of the good works that Paul refers to in our salvation. So I think that's what Jim is referring to there, and that is a very, very good point, a good text to bring up, that those whose end is destruction glory in shame. They glory in sinfulness, and they glory in shameful acts and things that are that God has said by his nature are evil or sinfulness. They are against his law and against his nature. So good point, Jim, and thanks for bringing that one up. I'm still waiting for clarification on this question here, so I'm going to answer that as soon as that comes in. If you guys have any other questions, we have about another 20 minutes or so that we can do this, or 25 minutes. Everybody's quiet today. I think everybody's tired. I think the abundance of rain has gotten to everybody. I was thinking this morning that I remember a year ago we had the wettest May on record. So the most rain in the month of May on record here in Chicago. And I was thinking a couple days ago, well, we probably aren't going to get to that again. And then it's poured buckets twice in the past week. So who knows? All right, so here's the clarification on the question. Even in the church, people tend to start doing good works for recognition. And then it almost turns into they are working for some part of their salvation rather than exercising their spiritual gifts for the Lord because they have been saved. I don't know if this makes sense, but it's almost as if believers understand the gospel in their heads, but they don't apply it when it comes to exercising good works. They are doing it for other reasons. Okay. Marilyn Bell, I see your question. That is a very good question. Let me come back to that one. You know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to deal with Marilyn's question because it still relates to the topic that we're talking about, and then I will go on to the question that relates to the sermon, just to do this in order. Okay. Marilyn says, what about sin that is just accepted as the norm in the book, show, etc.? Wouldn't that influence is to accept it too? Wouldn't that be an influence to accept it too? Okay, very good question. Is when there is sin in a form of entertainment, whatever it is, and it is just accepted as the norm in that story, does that necessarily mean that it's accepted or that we're accepting it? Here's where I think we need to be discerning. And I think this is a wonderful question, actually, because here's where it really becomes a matter, I think, of Christian conscience. And the reason why I say that is because some of us might interact with a story where a sin is sort of just there, present, yes, even accepted into the storyline of the plot and all those things, but it's neither celebrated and glorified nor denied and redeemed. And so does that necessarily or inherently mean that it is accepted and influencing us in a negative way? I don't think so. However, I think we could say that it might be different for different people. And this might be very much a 1 Corinthians weaker brother, stronger brother concept. If you don't know that, Paul is speaking to the Corinthians church about food sacrificed to idols. And he's saying for some, it's a matter of conscience that they just can't eat it. And for some, it's a matter of conscience that they can. And that they can take the food, this meat that was sacrificed to an idol, and they can cook it and serve it to their family. And it's in their Christian conscience, no problem. That is paganism. It has nothing to do with us. We can eat it, no problem. For others, they say, no, I cannot eat this because it is been sacrificed to idols, and therefore it belongs to Moloch or it belongs to whoever, and so therefore I can't participate in this. I can't have anything to do with this. This is decidedly a matter of Christian conscience there, and I think it's a matter of Christian conscience as we think about some of these films and forms of entertainment. Marilyn, I want to read your quote here. Vice is a monster of so frightful mean as to be hated needs but to be seen, yet seen too oft, familiar with her face. We first endure, then pity, then embrace. Yeah, okay. This is a very good point, and this is where I was going with this, is that at times there can be sinfulness within a show, within a movie, within a story, within a film, within a book, within a novel, whatever it is, and it's there, and we don't really see it for what it is. And we don't see it for what it is, and it has no effect on us. On the other hand, it can be there, and we cannot really notice it, and it is having an effect on us. And that's what you're speaking to, Marilyn, is that sometimes we can see sinfulness, we cannot deal with it, and what begins as simply just not noticing turns into tolerance, and tolerance turns into sort of an affection for it or a desire for it. And really what happens is it creeps in slowly over time to the point where we didn't really even notice it. And then all of a sudden it just becomes the norm in our life. Very, very important danger. However, in thinking of that as it relates to entertainment, we would also have to compare that to the fact that we are likely around sinners and sinfulness and an inherent storyline transgression all the time. Unless you are preserved in a Christian bubble where you don't interact with the world at all, you are going to see sinfulness every day. And it's going to be sinfulness every day, sometimes in patterns of sin, sometimes in ongoing things that are just part of people's lives that just go on. If you work in an office, or let's say you don't, let's say you work at a construction site, wherever it is that you work, you probably are going to be around people that swear like sailors. And you might, you might start as a carpenter, as you're a Christian, and you start as a carpenter, and you're like, wow, these people swear a lot. And then over time, you sort of get used to it, and you're just sort of hearing that language all the time, and it doesn't sort of pique you like it might have at the beginning. We should be clear that there is an inherent danger in that, because we can start to see some of those things as normative and accept them. And even as you're quoting there, seen with pity and then acceptance and embrace. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we must be in the world, but not of the world. And so while we are in a world that has inherent evilness, we might be in a situation where there is swearing like sailors all the time. not being of the world should force us to recognize that those things are wrong. They are present. They are there. And while we don't want to pity them, we don't want to embrace them at all, we also, by experiencing them over time, we are going to relate to them a bit differently than that real pressing, thumb in the wound sort of peakness that we might see when we see some sort of inherent sinfulness for the first time. And so all that to say is this is where Christian conscience is important. If you're going to work and all your coworkers are stealing company time, stealing company assets, and swearing and committing adultery with one another, that might not be the best environment for you. You might need to get out of there because your Christian conscience is weighing upon you in such a way that you say, I just can't do this. And that might be true initially, and that might be true in the long term. On the other hand, you might endure that job, and you might see all this sinfulness in your coworkers and whatever it is, and you might say, one, I need to feed my family, and two, I can exist in this environment without being either sympathetic to their sinfulness nor being tempted to embrace it in such a way that you recognize it, you see it, and you just know that's part of their sinful transgression and it's not part of who you are. This is why I think it's a matter of Christian conscience. We need to be very careful. As keeps getting pointed out to me, this is a very, very fine line, and I understand that. This is why, as Noah was saying, Romans 14, we need to give grace in these things. Is it sinful to go to work where sin is ongoing? No, not specifically, but it might be more than your conscience can handle, and if that's the case, you should find a different job. Is it wrong to watch a film where there is some sort of just background sinful behavior that's accepted as sort of normative, that's neither celebrated nor redeemed? It might be more than your conscience can handle to do that. It should be that your conscience needs to recognize it and it doesn't. And it might be that you recognize it, you know it is sin, and you can consume that form of entertainment without falling into sinfulness yourself. Okay? Very good question, Marilyn. Thank you for bringing that up. That's wonderful. That's the kind of question I love answering on a Sunday morning Q&A. Okay, somebody's commenting this idea applied to parenting, where parents act. By the way, if you don't want me to read your comments live without having read them first and filtering them, don't send them to me. Okay, because I'm just going to read them having not read this before. So there's no telling what this is going to say. Parents act as an external Christian conscience for the time being, meaning for kids. The goal being to transfer that same discipline to the children. Very good point. This, I think, is best done gradually, not suddenly. Excellent point. Raising a child in a bubble and suddenly exposing them at college seems dangerous, which happens a lot, by the way. Teaching the children self-discipline early means that they have to experience things that require them to practice exercising their own conscience. Perfectly well said. Kurt Knauts texted that to me. Great point. That is a goal of Christian parenting. It should be a goal of Christian parenting, is not to shelter your kids from all experiences and all evil and all sinfulness, but to help them see those things, to act as a sort of, what's the word I want to say there? Adjunct conscience for your children as their conscience is growing and the Holy Spirit is working in them. You're not seeing any new comments, Marion, because there aren't any. Okay? Nobody's commenting. So as parents, we should see that we don't have to protect our kids from everything, but instead we should help them experience things and then help them see those things from a biblical worldview. My daughter has taken a class this year called Film and Worldview, a wonderful class where they watch some films that I'm like, really? You're going to watch that? But in every class, then they discuss those things and they say, from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective, from a Reformed Christian view, this is how we understand what's going on here. And look, there's plenty of debate to be had within that class and within the genre as a whole. But in essence, what Amanda has been able to experience is how to see those things and how to see the evils that are inherent in some of those films and different things. So it's a good thing for us to allow our kids and to help our kids as their conscience grows, and then we can back off as parents. And I say this all the time, and I use this in my 3 kids. As our kids grow, we become less of a participant and more of a spectator in their lives. And those of you who are beyond where I am in the parenting arena, you know this to be true. You become much more of a spectator of your kids' lives than you are a participant. But while we have a chance to participate, we help them grow in Christian conscience and how to experience all of this stuff and how to not be entertained by the sins for which Christ died, which was the original comment on this. Kurt says his comment didn't fit in the chat character limit, so he had to text it in, which is exactly what he did. And I'm glad I read it. Thank you, Kurt, for bringing that up. Marilyn Bell says, which speaks to the importance of being faithfully involved in church and studying the Bible and connecting with the Lord through prayer in order to counteract the influence of the world. Wonderful point. Marilyn, let me just summarize all those things that you listed there as the ordinary means of grace, right? And all that's a Reformed Christian term that simply means the things that God has provided for us in order that we might grow in knowledge of His Word, in faith, in holiness, in righteousness, in righteous acts and service, all those things. Things like being in church and being involved in church and hearing the Word taught and growing in Christian discipleship and fellowshipping with one another and being discipled by one another, and all of those things. All of that helps us then to counteract these influence. And let me add to this, because we're saying it this way: not just counteract the influences on the world in ourselves, but also helping us be aware of those influences and aware of the evilness that's in those things. We not just counteract its influences, but we see it first, and we can identify it and speak against it. And so, yes, all of those things very, very important for this. Okay, Greg is asking a question about Titus. Actually, no, he's not. He's just making a statement about Titus. Well, okay. Well, hopefully Greg's got a question that's coming. I'm gonna respond to this other one first, and then maybe Greg will add to what what he's saying there. So this point that I just read a minute ago, it relates to the good works that we talk about in. The question is about balance of good works in us and how we get out of balance in this. And the point that was brought up is that even at times we just serve in the church and we just do things in the church so that everybody else in the church thinks that we're doing good things. We just do these things as sort of this Christian veneer. The best that I can say about this, I think, is that we can put on a show in a lot of ways, in a lot of parts of our lives, that can convince somebody of something to be true that is not actually true internally of us. And, look, I sort of painted the broad spectrum of this from moralism today and works righteousness, and then the counterbalance of that being true salvation that leads to good works. But somewhere in the squishy middle of that is the idea of somebody who is truly saved, who does truly have good works in their lives, but really a improper motivation for some of the things that they do is comparison with other people, or just a desire for people to think they are much holier than they are. It's a desire to look good but not actually be good, whatever it is. And the easiest and most obvious place for that is within the body of the church. And so we show up on Sunday morning with the kids dressed nice, and we all have our Bibles, and we sit 3 rows from the front, or 2 rows from the front. And I'm not picking on anybody who's sitting from the front. As a matter of fact, don't hear me say that, because I want everybody to move up. But 6.5 years of asking everybody to move up has not worked. So if you're sitting up front, please stay up there. But you understand what I'm saying is that we can put on these things that make us look holy, when the reality is inside our hearts that is just not true. And I don't know, maybe you could find that Alistair Begg thing on worship, and we could just put a link there for everybody to watch later, where he's talking about being in a worship service and how just 5 minutes before the worship service, where a family's coming into church, and you're having a fight in the parking lot, and arguing with one another, and you're arguing with somebody in the parking lot who cut you off and took your space and all these things, and then you can walk into the church building and pretend like everything's fine. And the truth of it is look, our lives, I don't like the Greg says we have assigned seats. That is true. I'm going to make a comment on that one moment. The reality is that our lives are messy, and I don't like that word, but that is true at times, that our lives are not always reflective of what we truly believe, and that's unfortunate. And I think the church needs to be the place where that can be where that can be dealt with in a real way. And God bless the millennial generation, those that are 30 and down to about 20, because they have a real desire for true fellowship. They have a real desire for real friendships, for true discipleship, and to really be known and to know others and to walk through these hard things in life. And I think that's a good thing. I think that that generation is calling the church back to something that we should be called back to, which is genuineness in our discipleship and our fellowship. You should have people in your life that are part of the church that you can go to and say, this happened and it hurts, and this happened and I've sinned, this happened and I'm struggling, this happened and it has absolutely broken me. And so that should be true in the church. And so I think where good works play into that then is that we need to be real in the church with each other, and then we can be real about where we need to grow. See, because if you come in, and Marion saying it's almost the norm for a family to quarrel before church, Satan is working to stop us from going. Yeah, that's true. And the thing of it is, you can't help a family grow out of that or to work through the issues that are inherent in that quarrel if the quarrel isn't even known by anybody in the church. And so how can the church come alongside people when we're putting on this veneer of good works, good deeds, morals, all these things, when the reality is that's not true in our lives? And so the first step is to learn to love one another in such a way that we can share openly and honestly and frankly with one another. And then there's the walking along, and then there should be the lack of real judgment there. I mean, if there's sin, the sin needs to be judged, but we judge the sin and we call repentance, and there's forgiveness offered and all of that stuff. And then we grow together and we can walk with our brothers and sisters in Christ in real good deeds, in real good works, not just fake ones. So then a family can maybe, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Marion, but maybe a family can go to church without fighting on the way, because sinfulness, wherever it is and might be present in somebody's life, can be dealt with in the church in a real and healthy way. And look, dealing with sin, I know that sounds awful, and it is. I mean, there's no fun. It's not fun dealing with sin, but it's something we need, and it's something we should want. And if we're going to have the good works that Paul speaks of, that we study today, part of that is recognizing that we need to grow, and we need our brothers and sisters to help us grow. And so we need to lean into that as much as we can in the church. And so I think that's where we get out of balance. I need to hide my sinfulness and the issues in my life and just put on the veneer of morality. And when we put on the veneer of morality, we don't actually get to the heart of stuff. And so we get really, really out of balance, and we don't really have good works at that point. We just have some sort of outward show that isn't really true. Okay, there's a couple other things that come in here. Greg wrote several things, so I'm just going to read everything you said, Greg. I have not read it yet, so here goes. Titus is broken down into 3 parts: appoint leaders in the church, teach good doctrine, exhortation to believers. So good works in this case is not about achieving salvation. This makes the works in the last part of Titus an evangelical directive to the church, our church specifically. Very good. And that's just a wrap of the book. And I think that's pretty good. If you remember me saying all along that Paul keeps giving these instructions and saying these things, elders, and then he gives the instructions to Titus. First, the elders not only are to be elders and what they're to look like, but then they're to refute false doctrine and false teachers, silencing them if necessary. And then then he leads into discipleship in the church, and good works is listed through all of that. And all of those things are sort of looking at what he writes at the end, which is verses 3 through 7 of chapter 3, which is that clear explanation of the gospel. And so the gospel is the thread working its way through all of those parts within the book of Titus. And so I think that's a very good wrap of the book that Eric brings up. Okay, I want to make a comment about Greg saying, Greg says, I think Satan works in all of our minds on Sunday morning. Well, okay. Yes, sort of. But Satan is the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. That's Ephesians 2. He is the prince of darkness. He hates our desire to worship God. That is absolutely true. I would want to be careful to say Satan is working in all of our minds, because that suggests that he is there and present, and I don't think that's possible if we are indwelt by the Holy Spirit. But I get the idea of what you're saying here, Greg, and I agree with you, is that because Satan hates true Christian worship, he hates God as a spirit, and he hates the truth of God, and we worship in spirit and truth. Certainly there are manifold temptations that come to us when we are desirous of and actually practicing true worship. And so those temptations come and we succumb to them. And I do think there's a difference there, because I don't think Satan is working in us. Satan is working around us, and we succumb to those things. And I'm guessing that's probably what you meant, Greg, when you said that. But that is, we should recognize that the battles that take place to get to worship and to have worship and all that stuff, a lot of that is because of the temptations of our world that are all the more present during times when true worship is taking place. So there you go. I think that's a good point, and it's something worthy of talking about. Greg says we have assigned seats at our church. Well, I'll make this the last point I'll deal with today. Maybe, unless somebody else has a good question. How about this? I'm going to start wrapping up here. We're going to get going. If you have something else you want to ask about or me to talk about here before we wrap up this morning, feel free to throw it in there while I talk about assigned seats at our church. You may have seen on social media, or maybe, I don't know where you would see stuff like this other than on social media. So maybe on social media. But there are some churches and around the country where people have actually either taken pictures of themselves and put them in the pews or the rows of the church, or I've seen some places where people have made life-size cardboard cutouts of themselves and colored them, drew on them and colored them to make it look like themselves, and placed it for their pastors in the pews and the rows at the church. And the reason why they're doing this is, look, you would just have to be here on a Sunday morning to know why this is happening. Because when you stand up there in the pulpit on Sunday morning, or you sit at the piano like Noah does, and you look out and you know it's the Lord's Day, and you know it's time for worship, and you know that we have called ourselves and called all of you to worship as a church, and you look out and nobody is there, it's weird. It feels weird. It is hard. I don't know how to say that. It's hard. And so the suggestion is let's get cardboard cutouts, or let's put pictures there. And so the reason why I bring all this up as it relates to Greg saying we have assigned seats is because I said that if everybody wanted to do this, and I've said this to a few people, not to everybody, but if everybody wants to do this, if you want to send me a picture or make a cardboard cutout of yourself, I would love to have it here at the church. And I am almost sure I could get your picture or your cardboard cutout into your row. I know your assigned seats that well from standing up every Sunday morning and seeing you all sitting where you usually sit, that I'm pretty sure I could get each of you and your families into just about the same row that you sit in every week. So do we have assigned seats? No. Is it pretty close? Yes. You would almost think we have assigned seats in our church based on all of that. And so send me a photo, let me know if you have a cardboard cutout, and I will put it into your row, and we'd be very happy to do that. We could draw our faces on balloons. That is one I had not thought of. I think that would be more distracting. I think that would be, I think balloon faces would be harder than no faces at all. Maybe what we should do, Kurt, is we should try that for a Wednesday night. Is you men who are usually here with me on Wednesday nights, let's try balloon faces, and we could hang them. We have to do helium balloons so they hang up from your chair, and we could hang them here in our reception room, and we could try balloon faces for Wednesday night, and I could just preach to all the balloons. Or on Wednesday night, I could teach systematic theology and systematic doctrine to all the balloon faces. That's a good idea. We should try that. Kurt, I'll get in touch with you, and we will effort the balloon face idea. And when they deflate...
that simulates age.
I don't think Noah's microphone is on. He says when they deflate, it simulates the aging process. Which, could be related. I mean, this is all systematic doctrine, right? Because the aging process relates to the death that comes by sin as promised in the garden. Sure. So as the balloons deflate and start to hang lower and then eventually go away, we can see the process of life and death as understood in the book of Genesis.
Yeah. Okay. So next time you look at a deflated balloon, remember your mortality.
Right. Okay, this is funny. In back-to-back comments, Charmaine says the deflated ones would look like the snoozers. That's the people asleep. Marion says the deflated ones would look like us older folks. I'm not saying this, but you might make a parallel between those two things. I'm not sure, right? You have to think about that one a little bit. Okay, that is good for this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Quite disappointing this morning that Scott Hall was not commenting as Sue Hall. I don't know where Scott is this morning and not commenting, but hopefully Scott's okay, and maybe he just wasn't able to comment as Sue Hall this morning. There is a helium tank in the church. That is true, although it might be empty. I'm not sure, Joyce. That might not be here anymore. Anyway, thank you all for being here this morning. Very glad to do this with you once again. We have some things coming up in the next few weeks. I don't want to announce them yet, but I do want to say that we'll be letting you know. We're going to do hopefully a very special Q&A here in a couple weeks. And hopefully we'll have some things to announce to you this week about all that. So I'll let you know. But thank you guys for joining us during the Q&A. Always love having you. Love seeing all the comments. It always starts out slow, and then by the end of the time, like it is now, there's so many comments. It's scrolling fast here right in front of me, and very thankful for everybody to participate in such a way during this season. And so thank you for your text messages and your comments and all of that. Greg and Jim, thank you for your comments and for your help through the chat as well. Okay, so let me say a word of prayer for us, and then we'll dismiss for this Lord's Day. Father, thank you for this time together as your church, together in spirit and in truth, together digitally but far apart physically. And Father, we pray that you would bring healing to our world and to our nation as we endure these days of pandemic. And we pray for that such that we might be back together again face to face in the flesh, worshiping you together as your people. And so during this time, I pray that you would give us a spirit of peace and a spirit of patience, that you would take away our restlessness and our rebelliousness. Father, help us to submit where appropriate and necessary. Help us to speak truth and to pursue truth and righteousness in all ways. And Father, I pray that you would bless us with a knowledge of Christ and with a robust faith to endure these things. And so bless us now as we go about our day and about our week. And Father, be with us by your Spirit, I pray. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Sunday. Have a great Lord's Day. We'll see you soon.